You know that feeling when you're completely absorbed in something you love, maybe uh, writing, painting, coding, whatever, and suddenly you look up and boom, hours have just vanished.
Oh, totally.
Or the complete opposite, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're stuck in traffic and every single second just drags on forever.
Yes. Feels like an eternity.
Exactly. Our personal experience of time, it often feels, well, wildly different from the precise, objective ticks of a clock.
Mm.
It's almost like there's this kind of secret rhythm going on inside us, completely out of sync with the world clock.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, back in the 19th century, there was this brilliant philosopher, Henri Bergson, and he looked at that exact disconnect.
Right?
While, lots of people were focused on mechanical clocks and rigid measurements, Bergson argued that the true core of reality, the very essence of it, is what he called durée,
Durée, yeah.
or lived duration.
Yeah.
It's this qualitative, continuous flow that our intellect, in its rush to categorize and predict, often just chops up into these frozen static slices.
Yeah, it freezes the frame, so to speak.
So today we're taking a deep dive into how Bergson's really profound insights are being reevaluated and, I think, truly understood through the lens of a modern framework called motion theory.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission here is basically to unpack how Bergson's concept of lived duration stands in this dynamic relation to our common understanding of clock time, and how motion theory might provide a fresh, maybe unifying perspective on these seemingly opposing truths.
That's the goal.
We're going to touch on his ideas about memory, evolution, and actually some surprising ways modern science is kind of quietly echoing his original thoughts.
Yeah, it's fascinating because Bergson wasn't trying to be anti-science at all. That's a common misconception.
Okay.
Instead, he was challenging this fundamental tendency we have to spatialize time.
Spatialized time,
Yeah.
like putting it on a map.
Exactly. Think of it like confusing a map with the actual territory it represents. We lay a useful grid over reality, like longitude and latitude lines, right? But that grid isn't the creative flowing river itself.
Okay.
Bergson argued that motion isn't just something that happens in time. Motion is the thing itself.
Huh.
Our intellect, while incredibly useful for analysis and prediction, often freezes this living reality into static frames. Makes it easier to handle, to predict, manipulate.
Right. Like snapshots.
Exactly. But intuition, for Bergson, that's what allows us to grasp continuous change from within, to really feel the flow. So just to give you the core distinction right away. Clock time, you could say, is how loops of motion compare rhythms across systems. It's relational.
Okay, comparing rhythms?
While duration is how a system experiences its own unfolding, its own becoming, while it stays in sync with the world, it's that internal continuous experience.
Okay, let's unpack this. Given that distinction, what was Bergson's core idea in, like, one breath, and how does motion theory translate that for us today?
Okay, one breath, Bergson would say. Our intellect freezes reality into static frames so we can handle and predict it, right? But intuition lets us re-enter the stream, grasp continuous change from within. He famously said duration isn't a line of instants. It's like a melody whose notes interpenetrate, they flow together.
The melody analogy, I like that.
Yeah. Any model that treats time as just a string of identical beads, it simply misses what time does. It composes, it creates.
That's such a vivid way to describe it.
Yeah.
So how does motion theory take that melody idea and, give it a scientific, maybe measurable framework?
Well, motion theory translates Bergson's duration as the phase continuous evolution of a loop.
Phase continuous evolution.
Yeah.
Okay, break that down.
Imagine a spinning top. Its phase is its exact position in its spin cycle at any given moment, like a point moving continuously around its circular path.
Okay.
Phase continuous evolution just means it's constantly moving through all those positions without any jumps or breaks, like a smooth, unbroken dance. It's a top's own uninterrupted unfolding.
Got it. Its own internal flow.
Exactly. Clock time, then, in motion theory, is how we compare the resolution rate between different loops, like how fast one top spins relative to another top.
So it's about comparison.
Right. Both are real, they just answer different questions about time. One's internal, one's comparative.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, when Bergson talks about durée or intuition, motion theory gives us a direct scientific way to think about it. Like, what would durée translate to in motion theory terms? And maybe intuition, too.
Precisely. Durée, or lived duration, becomes the internal phase continuity of a structured motion loop.
Okay. Internal phase continuity.
Yeah, it basically means how smoothly and coherently a recurring pattern of activity, like your heartbeat or maybe a thought process, unfolds within itself over time,
Right.
and intuition transforms into something like resonant attunement to a loop's unfolding from the inside.
Resonant attunement. Sounds like syncing up.
Essentially, yeah, it's a direct form of modeling where your brain, or really any system, understands another system by synchronizing with its rhythm, feeling it from the inside.
That makes perfect sense. And the flip side, the intellect or spatialization, Bergson cautioned against. What does that look like in motion theory?
That maps pretty cleanly onto our tendency towards external discretization for coordination.
Well, okay. External discretization.
It just means how we sample and grid the flow of reality, breaking it into discrete pieces of bits of information so we can analyze, predict, and share information about it, like using clocks and rulers.
Makes sense.
And even Bergson's concept of élan vital, the one that got him tagged as a mystic.
Yeah, the vital force thing.
Right. Motion theory reframes that as the creative novelty of reorganizing motion when constraints shift. It's not some mystical force, but the emergence of new, stable ways of organizing activity when the environment or the situation changes. It's about adaptation and invention within the system.
That's a really fascinating reinterpretation. It grounds it somehow. Let's talk about memory, because Bergson's big work, Matter and Memory, is absolutely key here, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
He didn't see memory as just like a warehouse full of snapshots. He had this vision of it as a cone of contraction. Can you explain what he meant by that? It sounds pretty abstract.
Yeah, it is a bit abstract, but powerful.
Yeah.
He saw memory, our past, as this vast cone where the widest base represents the entirety of our past experience, sort of virtually existing.
Okay, the whole past.
And this whole past isn't just sitting there, it's always pressing into the present moment, which is like the narrow tip of the cone, our immediate active experience.
So the past is always active.
Always influencing, yes. It means the past isn't static. It actively shapes our current actions and perceptions, and we access it at different levels of detail depending on what we need for action right now.
Yeah.
And he made this really useful distinction between habit memory, our motor routines, automatic behaviors like riding a bike.
Right, muscle memory.
Kind of, yeah. And pure memory, which is the more virtual, vivid, past the actual recollections, the images, the feelings that can be summoned and recomposed.
Okay, habit versus pure recollection. And from a motion theory perspective, how do we understand those different kinds of memory?
Well, motion theory views the brain as this complex hierarchy of interconnected rhythmic loops operating at different speeds, from very fast oscillations to very slow ones.
Okay, loops again.
Yeah, it's all loops. So habit memory corresponds to what we'd call deep attractors. Think of them as stable, well-worn patterns of neural activity, like grooves in a record that fire reliably on cue. Very efficient.
The bike riding groove.
Exactly. Pure memory, on the other hand, corresponds more to these high-dimensional phase patterns, complex rhythmic configurations that aren't necessarily active right now, but can recohere, can be brought back online when prompted by a cue.
So recall isn't like pulling a file from a cabinet.
Not really, no. It's more like rebuilding a rhythm. It's a kind of replay and reassembly process across different scales, different loops in the brain. Think about phenomena like hippocampal replay.
I've heard of that. The brain rerunning stuff.
Yeah, your brain rapidly reruns a sequence of neural activity representing a past event, maybe while you sleep, to consolidate it, strengthen the pattern.
Okay.
And there's theta gamma nesting, which is how different brain rhythms say, a slower theta wave carrying information about context, and faster gamma waves carrying details coordinate their activity. They nest within each other to process information, linking new experiences with old memories.
Wow.
And that's maybe why, a simple smell can suddenly trigger this incredibly vivid, complex memory of an entire childhood scene. A small cue can cause many different brain rhythms across scales to synchronize, bringing that whole complex pattern, the pure memory, back online.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about Bergson's ideas on creative evolution? His élan vital was definitely, caricatured as some kind of vitalism.
Right, often dismissed.
But if you read him carefully, he seems to be pointing at something more like open-ended novelty, right? Like life doesn't just execute a pre-programmed plan. It invents stuff under pressure.
Exactly. Evolution looks more like branching improvisation, not following some fixed script.
So how does motion theory frame that?
Under the motion theory frame, evolution is fundamentally about resynchronization under changing conditions. Think about it. Genomes, metabolisms, entire ecologies, these are all coupled systems of motion, of rhythmic activity.
Oh, I see. Systems of motion.
Natural selection then simply preserves the rhythmic coherence, the successful, stable patterns of activity that work in a given environment. Mutation and recombination. They propose new potential rhythms, new variations.
So biological innovation.
It's the appearance of new, stable rhythmic loops. Think of things like nervous systems developing or photosynthesis evolving that integrate successfully with the older existing loops within an organism or ecosystem. The drive isn't mystical, it's more fundamental. Coherent, stable patterns of activity inherently tend to persist and propagate.
This is where it gets really intriguing for me.
Ah.
Bergson versus Einstein.
The famous debate.
Yeah, 1922, right? Bergson challenged Einstein, arguing that relativity's time dilations, how time seems to slow down for objects moving really fast, that doesn't capture lived time, our durée.
Right. He felt something crucial was being missed.
And, well, physics pretty much declared victory and moved on, didn't it? But motion theory seems to offer a way to maybe reconcile them. How does it do that?
Yeah, the fascinating part is that from a motion theory perspective, they were arguably both right, just talking about different scales or aspects of time.
Okay, how so?
Relativistic time, time dilation, that's about how clocks, which are fundamentally rhythmic processes, run relative to each other in different frames of reference, especially under extreme conditions like high speed or strong gravity. It's about comparing their resolution rates, how many ticks of one clock happen per tick of another.
Right, the comparison again.
Exactly. Lived duration, Bergson's durée, on the other hand, is the internal unfolding of a system's own phase. It's how that system internally composes its own becoming its own sequence of states. It's about the internal coherence and continuity.
So, two truths, two scales, one world.
Kind of, yeah. Think of a fast-moving particle, like a muon. Its proper time before decaying is short from its own perspective. Motion theory wouldn't say its experience shrinks, necessarily, but rather that its internal rhythmic loop resolves fewer internal cycles before decaying, when measured or compared against our slower reference frame. Its internal duration, its phase continuity, is still unfolding from its point of view. The arrow of time we feel, our subjective sense of time passing, that might correspond to the monotonic deepening of internal coherence within our own complex system of loops, the continuous, irreversible unfolding of our own internal rhythms.
It's pretty incredible how much of Bergson's seemingly abstract philosophy is actually showing up in hard science today, even if scientists aren't always explicitly saying, hey, this is Bergsonian.
Absolutely. It's often implicit.
Like, take the temporal binding window in perception. Our brain essentially stitches together events that happen within, about 50 to 200 milliseconds? We perceive a causal sequence, like hearing a sound and seeing lips move together based on how close their rhythms are, not on perfect instantaneous timestamps. That feels very much like duration as a constructed continuity.
That's a perfect example. Or think about entrainment.
Entrainment, like syncing up.
Exactly. How our brains naturally lock on to external rhythms like music or speech. Our comprehension, even our pleasure, goes up with this rhythmic alignment.
That sounds a lot like Bergson's intuition as a form of synchrony, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
And predictive processing, the whole idea that the brain's model is constantly trying to anticipate the world like milliseconds ahead.
Right, predicting what comes next.
And that our conscious experience is essentially this ongoing process of prediction corrected by sensory error signals. Well, that looks an awful lot like Bergson's idea of the virtual past leaning into action, guiding our present rhythmic loops based on prior experience.
Wow, okay. And even in, say, motor control, how we manage movement. Yeah, studies show that the motor cortex doesn't seem to operate like a command center issuing discrete instructions like move arm segment A, then B, then C. Instead, it uses these low-dimensional patterns.
Low-dimensional, meaning
Actions are represented as smooth, flowing curves or trajectories within a continuous space of possible movements, rather than a series of separate points. Our lived movement is duration unfolding.
It really is almost as if science is quietly proving Bergson's points without always realizing it.
It does seem that way sometimes. But, if Bergson were around today to teach motion theory, he'd probably give us a few key lessons based on his original thinking.
Oh yeah, like what?
First, probably, don't worship the grids.
Right, don't confuse the map of the territory.
Exactly. Grids, clocks, measurements, they're incredibly useful for sharing information, for analysis, for coordination, but the continuous process of becoming, the durée, that's for being, that's the reality itself. Second, he'd likely say, keep novelty sacred. Yeah. A good theory of life or mind must explain how new things, new rhythmic loops, new ways of being can actually appear. It can't just be about how old patterns conserve themselves. It has to account for creativity, for emergence.
That makes sense.
What else? And critically, I think he'd tell us to center intuition as a valid method.
Okay, but not in a flaky way.
No, not as an excuse to avoid rigor, but as a kind of inside-out modeling approach. You use intuition, that resonant attunement, to sense the dynamics, to grasp the whole, and then you use intellect to formalize it, test it, pick variables that instruments can actually measure.
Use intuition to guide the analysis.
Precisely. And motion theory, building on this, is actually ready to make some pretty bold, testable predictions.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, for example, we could predict that subjective time dilation, that feeling when time thickens in fear or seems to vanish in flow states,
Yeah.
that this subjective feeling will quantitatively track the multi-scale phase-locking depth in the brain.
Okay, phase locking depth.
Uh-huh.
How tightly linked different brain rhythms are.
Exactly. How tightly coupled and communicative different brain rhythms are across various levels or scales. We could potentially test this using high-resolution brain imaging like ECoG or MEG.
Wow.
We'd look for stronger cross-frequency coupling. That's a measure of how different frequency bands in the brain coordinate, and see if that correlates with a longer reported duration for an event, even if the objective clock time is identical.
Wow. Okay, that's specific.
Or we could predict that the time it takes you to recall a specific memory will grow with the phase distance between your current brain state's rhythm and the stored rhythmic pattern of that memory. How far does your brain have to travel in its rhythmic landscape to reconstruct it?
Fascinating. So it's really about taking this intuition versus intellect distinction that Bergson highlighted,
Yeah.
and instead of seeing it as some kind of war, seeing it maybe as a necessary cycle.
That's a great way to put it. Bergson's warning wasn't really to ditch analysis, was it? It was to avoid confusing the slice with the flow, the map with the territory, to remember what the analysis is abstracting from. Precisely. You use intellect to stabilize things, to communicate, to discretize information into variables, write equations, build models,
The tools.
the tools. And you use intuition, that feeling for the flow, the durée, to navigate the continuous process itself, to choose the right scales for analysis, to feel the underlying constraints, maybe spot where new rhythmic loops, new possibilities could emerge.
So the engine of discovery is cycling between the two.
Absolutely. Intuit, feel the pattern, then formalize, make it concrete, then test it rigorously, then use those results to re-intuit, refine your feeling for the process. It's a loop.
Okay, so if we try to wrap this up, the core understanding we've gained here is that Bergson, maybe more than anything, gave us the language for the part of reality that just refuses to sit still.
Yeah, that's well said.
He protected the essential continuity of experience, our durée,
Yeah.
against the convenient but sometimes misleading slices and grids we use, not to romanticize ignorance, but to keep science honest about what it's abstracting from, what it might be leaving out.
Exactly. And motion theory, in a way, returns the favor by giving that duration, that continuity, a kind of technical spine.
The technical spine. How so?
Well, duration, far from being inherently unmeasurable, can actually be operationalized. We can develop phase metrics, ways to measure aspects of these continuous rhythmic flows.
Like the cross-frequency coupling you mentioned.
Right, or things like metastability lifetimes, which measure how long a particular pattern of brain activity, a particular rhythm, holds before it shifts to another one.
Okay.
Or we could look at predictive lead lag between different brain areas, which rhythm is anticipating another, and by how much.
Hmm.
And then, crucially, we can correlate these objective measures with subjective reports. How long did that feel to you?
Yeah.
And with observable behavior. This really clears up that old misunderstanding that duration can't be measured.
Mhm.
We can measure aspects of a system's internal phase continuity and coherence.
It brings us back to that really evocative analogy you used earlier. Time isn't just a line. It's maybe more like a living chord.
Ah,
Physics tunes the metronome, sets the basic beat, the clock time. But experience plays the harmony, the melody, the durée.
I like that. The harmony.
And Bergson's call was essentially to follow the music, right? Suggesting that when these two aspects of time, the measured ticks and the lived flow, when they lock together properly in our understanding, the world becomes truly intelligible.
And connecting that directly back to you, the listener, when you feel time thicken in grief or just vanish when you're in a state of flow, that isn't just some trick of your attention. Bergson, and maybe motion theory too, would say that's the sound of your internal rhythmic loops, changing their depth, their coherence, their interconnections. It's a real change in your system's dynamics.
Wow. Okay. So here's a final provocative thought for you to consider, maybe after this deep dive is over. If it was always motion, if reality is fundamentally rhythmic flow, and Bergson taught us to try and feel the whole phrase rather than just focusing on the individual ticks of the clock, what whole phrases, what larger rhythms or flows might you be missing in your own daily life just by focusing too much on the discrete, measured ticks?